We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Amy Zimmerman. She's the Chief People Officer at Relay Payments. Amy, it's good to see you. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for folks who are listening, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Christina. Um, my name's Amy. As you mentioned, I've been in tech for just over 2 decades. Um, Entered the industry as a recruiter, and have been in the startup ecosystem since the very beginning. Moved to Atlanta shortly after graduating school, and had two successful exits out of startups, and I'm currently working for my third. And I think it will be the most amazing. We're doing some really neat things. So excited to be here and excited to be a part of it. When I think back to the way I answered the question, what I wanted to be when I grew up as a kid, it was always a lawyer. Uh, Unsure why, but I was super passionate about it. The idea of criminal defense, interestingly, was my focus. Somewhat of a bleeding heart. The social work aspect just felt like everybody had, everybody deserved a voice, everybody deserved a shot. And actually was a social worker briefly prior to becoming a recruiter. And so it kind of followed suit. I came out of volunteering um, for HIV positive folks in Tampa where I went to school. Got into drug counseling briefly, and then moved into tech after I graduated and moved to Atlanta, but still kind of under the guise of really wanting to give back, really wanting to help people, really wanted to support um, growth, et cetera. And so I think I still do that today, and I still aspire to that today as well.
Absolutely. And with your experience in startups, you are constantly building and rebuilding, iterating, designing things, not only with the product or service, but with the organization as well, the company culture, as people continue to join the team as well. When you think about company culture as this dynamic thing, what are qualitative and quantitative ways you think about measuring it?
I think that there's some really obvious qualitative things. I think company culture, when it's good or bad, can be very obvious. It's almost palpable when you're in the environment, you're in a community. At my last two startups, people would say all the time, "Gosh, you could feel the culture." Right? You'd walk into the space and you felt the energy, you felt the culture, you felt the care for the community that we built. We were really, really intentional about curating an experience and an environment that people just felt like they wanted to be a part of. It was kind of contagious. And so I've been really, really lucky to partner with founders in my career that I really aligned with from a values perspective and within a community and kind of environment focus. And so when I met Ryan and Spencer, the co-founders of Relay Payments, I knew that I had hit the jackpot. I just knew that that we would align on values and that we would align on the kind of community that we wanted to build. When I started with them, we were in the throes of COVID, right? So everybody was remote. We did have a handful of folks in an office space that had to be physically available because of the nature of the work they did. But we had a WeWork type of environment. So it wasn't kind of a permanent place where we were really able to um, create a space. But I want to say 2 summers ago, but let me think. No, it was last summer. We wound up hanging our sign on a permanent space. And we got a beautiful office space. And now we've got folks in the office several days a week. We try to target 2 days a week where we have definitely the most focus, but it's open always. And because of the environment and the community that we've created, a lot of folks go in 5 days a week. Though it's not mandated, it's just so nice that people love to be there and love to be a part of it. So that's the qualitative. Quantitative, we measure all kinds of things that, a lot of companies measure. We do engagement surveys, so we ask for very direct feedback. Of course, we measure turnover. We're fortunate enough that our turnover is incredibly low. And I would say in large part that is our culture, right? It's the opportunities that we're providing. It's the investments that we're making in folks' growth and career, and ultimately we're growing really, really, really fast. And what happens when you grow at that sort of pace, there's tons of opportunity. And so whether you're looking for a promotion or not, in many cases, if you perform well, you're getting one, because there's just such a huge need and there's so many opportunities that you don't even anticipate, and you just find yourself doing more work, different work. And if you're happy with the industry and you're happy with the people you're working with, it's an awesome realization or development, even though it wasn't necessarily intentional.
Absolutely. And I think that adds to kind of what people are looking for, especially over the last few years in their careers. They're looking for those moments of happiness, purpose driven work, being celebrated and recognized by leaders. You mentioned kind of working with senior leaders and founders who really understood that company culture is important to the organization, doing it in an intentional way. And we've also seen that people are continually burned out. And also, one study showed that 47% of employees reported that their stress was higher than anything they'd previously experienced in their career today. But only 37% agreed that their organization really understood what they needed, both in their personal lives and for their family. So, kind of wanted to ask, how does Relay Payments really show up for the full lives of employees in your mind?
I think really simply, I think we ask. I think we're really reasonable. We've got certainly high expectations. We're transforming an industry. We're building payments in logistics. We're modernizing the way trucking companies, for example, make and receive payments. It's super outdated. I'd say even archaic. And so when you think about kind of the Venmo network, um, in logistics, that's essentially what we're building. So it's no easy feat, and it's a I was going to say ginormous. It's not even a word. It's a gigantic undertaking, and it takes really smart people, super committed and doing their best work. But how do you inspire that from folks when there's more elements or more dynamics to people than just their work persona? And that you accept their whole person, right? And so, we realize that people work better at different times of day and in different locations. And so we're not mandating that everybody be in the office, and we're not mandating that everybody start their day at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. because that's traditionally how things have always been done. What we're doing instead is we're hiring really smart people, and we're sharing our mission and we're sharing our vision, and we're hiring people whose values align with ours, and we're creating some autonomy. We're creating an environment where people can do their best work. I was going to say in their own way, and it's not entirely. I mean, we can't have necessarily 160 people doing exactly their own thing, but we've got some guardrails. But generally, we trust people to do the amazing work that we've hired them to do. And so I think it's about empathy. I think it's about compassion. I think it's about, making sure you hire people whose values align. I know I've said that several times. It's super important, but that you're transparent and that you offer continuous feedback, and that you engage the idea of no surprises, because communication's a two-way street, and that you're compassionate and empathetic and supportive. And I think if you do all of the things and ultimately act human, you'll more often than not get people who are receptive to that and want to do their best work. They might need some support, they might need some flexibility, but hey, isn't that kind of what life is about? There's not necessarily a prescription or a one size fits all for everybody anyway.
Sounds like you take a really people first approach to your company culture, and also thinking about the ways in which people are set up for success, thinking about non-negotiables for your organization too. I saw that Relay Payments was also on Inc.'s 2022 Best Places to Work list, along with AllVoices as well. How would you describe your current employer brand today and where you want to be aspirationally, for example, a year from now?
You know, I, I'll say that I think where we are today is not so dissimilar to where we want to be. I think we want to be authentic. We want to live our values. We want to do what we say and say what we do. I think we generally do all of that today. I think the biggest difference is we're a young company. We're 3 years old. We've got about 160 folks globally. Um, and we started in stealth mode. So we didn't do a lot to promote our employer brand. We didn't talk a lot publicly and do a lot of press releases about the products that we brought to market or any of those types of things. And so, from a brand perspective, I think we're still in our infancy. We still do a lot of sourcing because we don't have a giant brand that generates the kind of inbound interest from candidates. But I think if I had the opportunity to shout from the rooftops, what an amazing culture we've built and what an amazing environment that we've curated, and how fantastic our founders are and what visionaries they are, and the incredible work that we're doing. I think that's really the focus over the next couple of years is how do we continue to grow our brand in a way that we get access to the types of people that we need access to in order to grow our team member population, um, by, with the same types of people, not the same types of people that we've got, but the same types of people who embody our values,
Mhm.
right? So with a focus on diversity, with a focus on a lot of different things, but ultimately with the common ground or the common thread being more people who embody our values with more diverse experience from more diverse backgrounds, but who thrive in an environment like ours that's moving at the pace that we're moving and doing transformational things from a payments and an industry perspective.
Absolutely. And it comes down to those values. I want to bring it to a kind of specific example as well. You mentioned not a one size fits all approach to the work that you're doing and having the organization set up guardrails or non negotiables to set people up for success. I noticed in our email communication, you have a note about, quote, my working hours may not be the same as your working hours. Please don't feel obligated to reply outside of your regular work schedule. When did you implement this note, and why is this kind of really important to note, especially from a chief people officer?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I stole it. It's definitely not like original thinking. I've always thought it because I've always worked fairly non-traditional. I mean, I work throughout the day, but I've got 2 kids and now we're in summertime, and one of them's going to go to volleyball camp from 9 to 2, which means I might not get to my computer until 9:15, and I might have to take a break to pick her up at 2 o'clock. And so my schedule is somewhat intermittent because I have to manage my life with my work. What it means is oftentimes I'm on the computer later at night, and I'm getting through the last part of my email, and I'm knocking out different types of things that I need to focus on in a day, or things that I've committed to. But they aren't always during core business hours. When I think about core business hours, I think traditionally it's like 8 to 5. I usually check in when I wake up in the morning, well before 8. I might get some exercise done. I might do some other things, but might not be on or officially started until 9:30, quarter to 10. But I also might, wrap up at 5:30 and be back online at 9 until midnight. Not every night, but many days. And so if I'm sending people emails at 11 o'clock at night, the last thing I would want them to think is that I expect them to respond, because they might have knocked out their full day during core business hours or during other hours that aren't the hours that I'm working. So I've always thought, boy, I hope people just know. But what I've learned over time is people don't just know, especially if you're in a fairly senior position. And so there's this expectation, oh no, my boss is working at 11 o'clock. I probably need to respond to them. And so I put that in my tag or in my signature, in hopes to tell people, hey, just because I'm knocking some things out at this time doesn't mean I expect you to. Like, get to this when you normally get to things like this. Now, if it's urgent and it's an emergency and I need an all hands on deck sort of thing, I would say that in an email. I can't think of one single example in 20 plus years where something needed to be done in a non-production environment. I'm not tech. If I were on the tech side, I know that happens plenty. But in my world, 11 or 12 o'clock at night is not really an expectation that I have of other people. And so I just thought when I saw a similar type of message in somebody else's signature, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do something like that because I should reinforce and not just assume people know that.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to transparency, really effective communication, and not assuming that folks know something, as you were talking about as well, especially an email coming from you too, thinking I need to respond right away to this as well. I want to talk about you've seen the team grow a lot over your time at Relay. I think you've helped intentionally grow the team from less than 10 to 160 plus globally. How have you really thought about that intentional strategy for growth, especially when you hear a lot of companies say they're growing like gangbusters, fail fast and then fix it, and things like that? What is your philosophy around that?
I'd say somewhat similar, though. When I think about growing intentionally, it's about laying a really strong foundation. And so 2 summers ago, when I met the founders, they were single digit numbers. And I started fractionally 40 hours a month. And that was when I started my People Go business. And I did advisory work and I did fractional type work for a variety of different companies and didn't necessarily intend to work for one company full time. They said, look, we're about to close a round of funding. We're going to need to grow a ton. We understand this industry. We understand this business. We know how to build product. What we don't know how to do is scale a large organization. And we believe over time that's what we'll need. And rather than doing it and falling on our face and having to fix a bunch of stuff because we did a lot of hiring and we didn't have the right foundation in place, we want to hire you now, even though it's probably well before any company in their right mind would hire a chief people officer. But we want to get it right out of the gate. And so I came in and very methodically created the infrastructure, knowing that we were going to eventually be a multi hundreds of people organization, and that we were going to do it very deliberately. And so we defined our values, we defined our success criteria, we created guardrails, we started to create a rhythm of communication and different types of programming that I knew ultimately would be best from a scale perspective, maybe overkill really early on in terms of the more formal programs, but stuff that would scale really well for a small growing company. I created with the founders support a thing called success criteria to assist us with hiring, to ensure that we were hiring equitably and that we were being fair really early on, well before most companies even think about that sort of thing. We created scorecards. We brought on HR tech that we knew we would need to support that kind of growth. I did most of the recruiting in those early days, and then ultimately over time hired a team. And so we've got recruiters, started thinking about brand, started thinking about how do we get our value prop out there? How do we think about performance development? Kind of methodically went through the pillars from a people perspective around the finding of people, the growing of people, and the keeping of people, and laid the foundation for all of those. I'll call them pillars for lack of better words. And so at no point in the 2 years that I've known and partnered with our founders did we ever do anything haphazardly from a people perspective. It's all been very intentional and very deliberate. And I think probably most of our people would say it feels that way. We're intentional, we're transparent, we've committed to very specific things. We tell them during onboarding what we've committed to, and then we deliver and we show up in the ways that we promise we're going to. And so there's a lot of trust because we've got, I'm going to call it a high say do ratio. We do what we say we're going to do. And so people trust that. What happens with companies is they don't always follow through, or oftentimes they don't follow through on the things they say they're going to do, and that's how trust erodes. And so that's something we've been very committed to.
Yeah, that alignment between, okay, these are our goals, this is what we're saying we're going to do. We appreciate your feedback. We appreciate these kind of mutual conversations. And then what is the action after that? Do you have the transparency there? Trust doesn't just happen because you want it to be there. You have to make these intentional strategies and again, iterate them too from what we were talking about earlier. We've seen a lot of companies really kind of lean into innovation because they had to over the past few years over all of the many challenges and curveballs that we've had to. And it's really exciting to see what's happening in the people, talent, culture space. Are there any common mistakes you're seeing companies or leaders still making in their people strategy? Of course, without naming any names, just things you're seeing out in the ether.
Oh gosh, yes, in spades. People aren't listening. Like your team members are telling you what they need. You got to adjust. You got to do things differently. And I think people get kind of stuck in this kind of hamster wheel of, well, we've always done things a certain way, and they just kind of work out. And I would say we're in a very different time. We're in a very different space, and things need to be thought through differently. And that's why, frankly, when you reached out and said, would you be interested in talking about reimagining culture? I was like, yeah, because this is a topic that's really, really important. And it's not, it's we're in a time right now, I would call it an inflection time, where you have to reimagine it or you're going to lose your best people. And
Mhm.
ultimately, you're not going to be able to compete in the industry if you don't have your best people to equip you to build the products or launch the services or, whatever that your business does without the right people. And so, yeah, it's listening is probably the biggest thing. Promising things and breaking your promises, not being transparent. So not ensuring that people feel really connected to the mission and the vision of the company. It's easy to lose sight of that, especially in a hybrid environment. I'm not going to call it fully remote because I think most companies have gone back to kind of a hybrid type of situation. But it certainly still has its challenges. And so keeping people engaged, reinforcing the mission, reinforcing the vision. We talk about our goals and we talk about the customers that we're serving every single month live. We do an all hands. We do a ton of different things every week, different types of touch points, different types of programming. But we reinforce what it's all about, the purpose, right? People want a purpose. And when they walk around and feel purposeless, they lose interest. And then on top of it, if there's a potential erosion of trust, you're dead. It's why people are leaving. It's why people are seeking out something different than what they've got in many cases. But I don't think it's that difficult for companies that aren't tone deaf and are paying attention. And
Yeah.
especially now, there's all these layoffs now. The last couple weeks, we went from the great resignation to the great layoff. And
Mhm.
so companies that are well positioned and growing responsibly, I hate to use that word, but growing responsibly and not having to lay people off now have an enormous amount of opportunity where
Right.
they might have struggled before from a recruiting perspective. Now there's just a ton of people, really capable, fantastic people looking for their next home. So huge opportunity to capitalize on.
It's a huge opportunity, and you're right. This is a need to have, not a nice to have, in terms of reimagining how you've always done things. Business as usual is out the window. Don't think of yourself as being on a hamster wheel because you need to be able to compete in this market. You want to have folks who feel that purpose and feel like their work is making a difference as well. Is there anything, Amy, that I didn't ask throughout our conversation that you want to highlight, or 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope listeners bring with them after hearing our podcast around values, around intentionality, around working with leaders? Always like to ask.
I think there's two simple things, and I said one of them, and that's listen. Just
Yeah,
listen. If you're doing an engagement survey, respond to it. If you don't, then why are you bothering asking people for feedback and input? If you're
exactly.
not willing to do anything with it, essentially you're telling them you didn't hear them, or worse, you don't care. So my suggestion would be don't do it if you're not willing to listen. The second is really simple: recognition. It doesn't have to cost anything. Recognition goes a long way. People are working really hard. And also people are in an interesting place with family, with, you know, coming out of a pandemic, there's all kinds of mental health stuff and, different things that people are navigating and dealing with. A little recognition goes a long, long, long way. And people crave it. The research suggests it. There's tons of data. You don't have to do complicated, complex recognition and rewards programs, but you've got to do something. And so I would say those would be my key takeaways when you think about culture and really driving a people first culture. Listen and reward, recognize.
Listen, reward, recognize. Those are great calls to action to top up our conversation. Amy, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thanks, Christina. It was great chatting.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening on All Voices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood. And know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.